Saudi Aramco's debut international bond sale has smashed records for an emerging market debt deal, with the state oil company receiving bids for more than 10 times the $10 billion it was expecting to raise. It's being seen not only as a vote of confidence in the firm, but also in the Saudi royal family, which has suffered an international backlash over the killing of journalist Jamal Khashoggi in the kingdom's Istanbul consulate in October. Banks handling the transaction say orders for Saudi Aramco's debt have reached $100 billion. The US dollar-denominated debt issue will be split into 6 tranches, with maturities ranging from 3 to 30 years. Now, Aramco had initially wanted to raise around $10 billion from the bond sale, partly to finance its $69 billion acquisition of petrochemicals firm SABIC from the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund. The marketing prospectus for Aramco's bond disclosed the firm's financial statements for the first time last week, showing it's the world's most profitable company. It reported net profits of $111 billion last year, nearly double that of Apple. Well, let's get more on this blockbuster bond sale with Ellen Wald in Jacksonville, Florida. She's the author of the book Saudi Inc. and president of energy consulting firm Transversal Consulting. Good to have you back on the program, Ellen. Now, demand for the Aramco bond has grown exponentially over the last 24 hours when the firm first launched the sale. It started at $30 billion, then we heard figures of 50 and 85, and now it's at $100 billion. Why do we have this insatiable demand for the company's debt?
I think it comes from a couple factors. One is that the Aramco financials revealed that it is indeed the most profitable company in the world, and it has an incredibly low cost for producing a barrel of oil, and it has incredibly large crude oil resources. So when you look at just how long and how far down the line it will be able to keep producing, those numbers are pretty spectacular. And so you can see why financial institutions would see Aramco as a very safe investment. And I do think that also we've seen a lot of people are interested in getting into the Saudi market, but they're not looking for the kinds of risk that investing, say, in Tadawul, the Saudi stock exchange, or in Saudi equities would provide. So this is probably seen as a fairly low-risk way to kind of test the waters and see what it's like investing in Saudi Arabia.
When do you expect Aramco then to finally put a price on its bonds, and what can we expect from that, given this huge demand for the debt?
Well, we did hear today that they have raised the bond from $10 billion to $12 billion, in part due to the incredible interest that has been demonstrated. They were planning, I believe, on closing it today, though it's possible they may extend. However, I don't think that this is the first, this is the only bond offering we'll see. Aramco is doing this to acquire SABIC, as you mentioned, but they're planning a lot of major expansion projects over the next several years, 10 years, 20 years down the line, and it's expected that they will issue more bonds to go forward with those efforts.
I want to talk more about just what they'll spend the money on in a moment. But of course, this bond issue comes barely 6 months since the terrible Jamal Khashoggi killing in the Istanbul consulate last October. And at the time, JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon famously pulled out of the so-called Davos in the Desert Forum amid the global outcry over this killing, which was widely blamed on the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. But ironically, just 6 months later, we have JP Morgan leading the charge in this current bond sale. Is this a sign that perhaps the international community, or at least the international business community, has forgiven Saudi Arabia over this tragedy?
Well, I don't know if I would go so far as to say that they were punishing Saudi Arabia in the first place. The international business community has really one goal, and that's to make money. So pulling out of the conference and expressing dissatisfaction at the Saudi government's actions was definitely important for them in terms of media presence, but it doesn't necessarily signal that they weren't interested in Saudi Arabia as a place to make money. Now, if they deemed the Saudi government to be unstable, then that would be a sign that investors are not willing to go into Saudi Arabia. Now, Aramco and the country are very closely linked, and we saw a lot of that in the prospectus, but they're not the same thing. And the question to really ask here is how much is the government going to possibly affect Aramco? Are they going to do things to Aramco that would make it less profitable? Because that's really the question here. And it seems that Jamie Dimon's answer is no. We think Aramco is really the backbone of the Saudi government, and they'd be ridiculous to try to mess with that. And so while perhaps we may not want to invest, say, in equities in Saudi Arabia or build a project or invest with the Saudi PIF jointly in projects in Saudi Arabia, buying Aramco bonds is seen as a much less risky perspective. So I wouldn't go and say that they've necessarily forgiven the Saudi government, but I think there is a recognition that Aramco is not the same thing.
Interesting. And let's finally talk more about where this money will be spent. We mentioned SABIC, but aside from that, do you think the funds from this bond issue could be used to perhaps kickstart the Saudi Crown Prince's Vision 2030 for Saudi Arabia?
Well, that's really what the PIF is looking to do with this money. So originally, the Aramco IPO was supposed to raise money that the PIF would then use to fund all sorts of other projects that it wants to get into. But the IPO, it's very clear that there are significant reasons why an Aramco IPO would not have been good at this juncture. So instead, the PIF said, hey, how can we raise money? We can sell SABIC, which is this company that they hold a majority of. So they got Aramco to buy SABIC, and so a lot of this money is going to go into the sale, into the purchase of SABIC, and then the PIF is going to have, say, over the next couple of years, $70 billion to kind of play with, make investments, and so on and so forth. Now, the big question is, are PIF investments really going to kickstart the Saudi economy and diversify it? And that really remains to be seen. The PIF does feel that the tourism projects, for example, that it's investing in are going to help the Saudi economy and generate jobs and employment and things like that. But that really is not clear at this point as to whether PIF investments are actually helping diversify the Saudi economy.
Okay, Ellen Wald, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you again for your time on Money Talks.